The 2023 season is quickly approaching and you're probably in the middle of your fantasy research. Well, I've been tracking all the latest news and there's a handful of players currently going undervalued based on this new information. And I'd like to share those players with you. Here are 10 major values you need to target immediately. And we begin with the Rams draft, the wide receiver that they selected in round 5. So a rookie, 5th rounder, Puka Nacua. Puka has solid size at 6'2", he's about 210 pounds, and right now he's gaining traction in camp. Because as you can see from 32 beat writers on Twitter, he found this quote that, look, Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, and Cooper Kupp, like the 3 most important people on this team, yeah, they're giving praise to Nacua. And it goes on to say that he's quickly carving out a role in this offense that just doesn't have a lot of weapons. And there is even more praise coming out about Nacua because people are comparing him to Robert Woods because he was blocking well in the run game and receiving game. He could take handoffs in the run game. And Robert Woods is somebody who was a top 24 receiver for the Rams. And Nacua specifically was productive last year. He was great. This is a ranking of wide receiver efficiency last year, and he ranked number 1 across every single receiver, ahead of guys like Marvin Harrison, who could be a top 10 pick next year. Jalen Hyatt, who was a 3rd round pick this year. He averaged 3.5 yards per route run. And he was number 1 in PFF wide receiver grade last year and had just 3 total drops. And now he has a real chance to start this year because outside of the great Cooper Kupp, there's really no competition here. He's going to basically have to compete with guys like Van Jefferson, Ben Skowronek, and Tutu Atwell. And when you start to go through this competition, it's not all that great. Tutu in 2 seasons, 1 with injury. He only has 18 total receptions. Van Jefferson has never been able to fully put it together. Last year, he was number 80 at earning targets per route amongst receivers. And then there's Ben Skowronek, who's just not efficient. He was 97th in yards per route run last year amongst receivers. He's basically a bigger tight end, maybe like a red zone weapon, but not much other than that. So consider Puka, especially if you're in a league that has like 16 to 20 rounds in it, and then consider this next quarterback. And it's a player that I wasn't all that hot on earlier in the spring and summer, but now as we get deeper into it, I think Kyler Murray is a great fantasy pick because the risk has basically disappeared with him going as the 23rd quarterback off the board right now in round 13 or 14 of fantasy drafts. Now let's discuss this whole scenario. Kyler had a late ACL tear last year. He tore his ACL on December 12th and he had surgery just a couple of days later. So mid-December is when he had his surgery, and this is a 9 to 10 month recovery, which means he could return for week 1 on the early end of things in week 9. But if it goes for 10 months, he could miss about a month of the season. And as you can see from Sports MD analysis on Twitter, I actually took this as positive news because he said, I lean towards these players missing week 1. Javonte Williams, Zach Ertz, La'el Collins, and another name in there is Kyler Murray. But that's fine if he thinks, okay, maybe he could play by week 2. Because if Kyler plays week 2, the fact that you get him as the quarterback 23 is the number 1 steal in drafts. But a lot of people are concerned that Kyler might just get shut down for part of this year because the Cardinals are only expected to win 4.5 games. But here's the thing about this. It's a total opinion and complete guess. Because it makes sense in theory, but in all practicality, when a player like Kyler Murray is able to play, he's going to want to do his job in the thing he loves and play football. And my guess is he'll do just that. And as you can see right here, he's been the number 3, 4, and even last year 7 quarterback. And last year he was limited in rushing because of just some injuries, nagging injuries he was dealing with. And he was still a top 10 quarterback. Now you get him as the 23rd quarterback. So he's a much less risky option now that he's going outside the top 20 quarterbacks. Get him and this late round running back. And that running back's name is Malik Davis. Maybe you haven't heard of him or you've barely heard of him, but he's going undervalued right now because he's currently the running back 2 in Dallas behind Tony Pollard. But he often goes undrafted in fantasy leagues, and here's what you need to know. Davis goes outside the top 300 players in fantasy drafts right now as the running back 88. And now despite being an undrafted rookie last year and playing behind guys like Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, he was still able to manage 45 total opportunities. And he produced a strong and above average 5.1 yards per touch. And he's interesting because there's not all that much competition. The only other running backs on the roster behind Pollard and Davis are Ronald Jones, Deuce Vaughn, and Rico Dotto. Let's discuss. In terms of Deuce Vaughn, he's undersized at 5'5", 179 pounds, and he was a late 6th round pick, the 35th pick in the 6th round. And his dad is actually a coach on the Cowboys staff, which there's a good chance they kind of drafted him just for that connection. Then there's Ronald Jones, who last year only played in 6 games and had 17 rush attempts. He's aging now, and he has not been all that efficient in about 3 years. And the only other competition is probably somebody who might not even make the team, and that's going to be Enrico Dotto, who has just 7 career touches in 2 seasons. Now, one more thing, Davis can also catch, because as you can see right here, in his final 2 years of college, he had a 31 reception season and a 23 reception season, and this is while splitting a backfield in some of these seasons. Anything over 20 touches for a college running back in the receiving department is considered solid. And another way to look at this receiving production is per the Player Profiler college target share is about 9%, 71st percentile, so like top 30%, so well above average for all college running backs ever. And Davis is also explosive, which helps getting yards after the catch, picking up yards after the catch on the ground. He has a 94th percentile burst score according to Player Profiler. That's about top 5% of all time. So consider Davis and then this next wide receiver in the later rounds. And that would be Josh Reynolds, who's another player who is going under undervalued that will rise up draft boards this summer. He is the Lions wide receiver 2. And in this role last year, he was great. Just see for yourself. Because from weeks 2 to weeks 5, Reynolds averaged 13.4 fantasy points, 7.8 targets, and 77 yards per game. Reynolds was a top 15 wide receiver in points per game during this time, ahead of a bunch of big names in Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, right next to DK Metcalf and Devonta Smith. But then all of this momentum was halted because he got injured. Reynolds strained his back at the end of week 8. He ended up missing 3 games. He didn't get back to his full snap share until week 13, but he really never looked 100%. But now he's healthy and he has even less competition than the beginning of last year, because now he'll get to play a full year without TJ Hawkinson instead of just half the year, and Jameson Williams will miss the first 6 games of 2023, which means that outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, the main competition for wide receiver 2 targets on the outside will be Marvin Jones, who's currently 33 years old. And just last year alone, he ranked 77th in yards per route run, only getting about 1.2 yards every time he ran a route. That is not great. So take Reynolds in like round 18 of your drafts or the last round, and then target this next tight end. And that would be Darren Waller, who's now a Giant, because in March, New York traded a 3rd round pick for him. Now, Waller currently goes in round 8 of fantasy drafts as the tight end 7 off the board, even though he's a #1 option on his team. Now let's dive in. Plain and simple, Darren Waller had a frustrating 2022 season. Before the season even started, at the end of July, on July 30th, he had a hamstring strain, and then he re-aggravated this in October, and in total missed 7 games due to this hamstring, but was really never healthy the entire year. Now, despite this, Waller was still productive when he was actually out there. He was top 10 in tight end efficiency, #1 in tight end deep targets, and #2 in yards per reception. And ESPN has done an article about the #1 player from each training camp currently standing out, and for the Giants, it was Darren Waller, and they say just from the first play of the game, he made a difference. He blew by a nickel cornerback, caught a deep ball right down the sideline, and this is his type of role. He's a deep play guy, as we just said. He led tight ends last year in deep targets, and he could bring this over to the Giants. Now, the Giants were busy this offseason adding a ton of wide receivers, and a lot of these guys look very similar. They signed Jamison Crowder and Paris Campbell. They drafted Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round. They re-signed guys like Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins. Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson will come back from injury as well. But out of all those names I just mentioned, none of them are by far and away a clear-cut wide receiver 1, which opens the door for Waller to fill that role. Now, before we continue going, if you want to actually draft some of these players right now for your chance at a $3 million prize, well, make sure that you sign up for Underdog Fantasy. It's linked down below. They're a beautiful partner of ours because their Best Ball Mania contest is that. Check this out. $3 million to first. Somebody literally won this same contest last year for $2 million, and now they've increased it by $1 million. And as you can see right here, you can do a 30-second per pick draft, or if you just don't have that time to sit down right there, you can do an 8-hour per pick draft, a slow draft they call it, and there's $15 million in prizes. Now, they do have other contests as well, so you can be sure to check them out, linked down below. And if you use the code SAL in the link in the description below, you'll get a free match up to $100. So if you put in 100, you get 100 right back. So check out Underdog Fantasy, and then check out this next player. And for that, we'll go to the Arizona Cardinals draft, which in round 3, they drafted the wide receiver out of Stanford and Michael Wilson. And as you can see from 32 beat writers on Twitter, Wilson's already standing out in camp because without DeAndre Hopkins there and Hollywood Brown not being there for a lot of it, he's gotten a lot of reps, and he might have a day 1 role, as you can see right here. And now here's what you should know about Michael Wilson. Similar to Darren Waller's season last year, Wilson's college career the last couple of years have been frustrating. But it didn't start out this way, because in his rookie year, he broke out right away. In 12 games, he had almost 700 yards on 84 targets, a great season for Stanford. But then over the last 3 seasons, he's only played 14 total games because of COVID in 2020 and then also injuries. However, the good news is that Wilson is an elite athlete. He has well above average speed, burst, agility, and catch radius, and solid size around 215 pounds. And his 3rd round capital suggests that his injuries aren't a major concern to the Cardinals. And now Wilson has less competition to try and grab a starting role, because Wilson's role will be a bigger body on the outside, and there's only 2 other receivers on the team that fit this role. Auden Tate, who I don't expect to be there, and then Zach Pascal. Zach Pascal is currently having a good camp, and coaches love him because he can block well. But he's never had over a 44 reception season, never been much of a threat in the passing game, which Wilson could be. So consider Wilson late and then grab this next tight end. And for this tight end, we'll head back to the Rams and we'll look at Tyler Higbee, because Higbee currently goes as the 16th tight end off the board after guys like Cole Kmet and even a rookie Dalton Kincaid, and this is just a mistake because Higbee is a major piece of his offense. Let's look. Literally last year alone, he led this team in targets. Obviously, Cooper Kupp was hurt on targets per game. He was still second though, behind just Kupp. He had 104 total targets, a career high for Higbee. And it wasn't just without Cooper Kupp that Higbee was productive. No, with Kupp active, he averaged 7.2 targets and 10.5 points per game. So he was still a top 10 tight end even with Kupp active, and now he goes outside the top 15 guys. And Higbee still has some of the cheat codes because last year he was 7th in red zone targets and 3rd in routes run amongst tight ends. So consider Higbee and this next RB. And that running back is Chandler out of Minnesota, who is still undervalued. In most drafts, he's going undrafted. If you're playing on a site like Underdog, where everybody there is well informed, well, he probably goes in like round 15. But in a lot of fantasy home leagues for just people that just play a couple of leagues a year, he's going undrafted as the 70th running back off the board. Now, here's what you need to know about Chandler. Plain and simple, he's going to be the running back 2 in Minnesota. He'll be the running back 2 behind Madison, and it's not like Madison is some Saquon Barkley level talent. I mean, Chandler could still see somewhere around 10 to 12 touches per game. Now, his rookie season was cut short due to an injury. In week 5, he ended up fracturing his thumb and missing the final basically 10 games of the year. But now he's healthy heading into year 2, and here's what you can expect. Chandler does have an elite trait, and that is his speed. He ran a 4.3840, a 93rd percentile speed score. And in his final year at college at UNC, when he actually saw a bigger workload, he had over 1,000 rushing yards, he had over 200 receiving, so about 1,300 total yards, and had 14 touchdowns. And now here's some other running backs in this backfield. You have Kenny Ngongwu, but he's mostly like a special teams captain and ace, so he'll probably stay there. And then there's Dwayne McBride, who was a 7th round running back this year, really productive in college, although not the best competition he faced, and also he's kind of like a worse Alexander Madison. So your takeaway is that Chandler projects to be a player like Raheem Mostert with elite speed, but he's a better pass catcher than Mostert, so consider him a solid handcuff in fantasy. Now, before we get to this next running back, who's also a very strong option, I just want to ask you, do you want to win your fantasy league? Because if you want to beat your buddies and take home the championship, the Fantasy Blueprint is for you, because it's going to have all the tools and analysis you need to do just that, including the fantasy tiers, which are going to be your #1 asset while drafting, with even highlighted best and worst values, as you can see in green and red. And to get your blueprint, it's simple. Just click the link below and follow the 2 quick steps to join the thousands of others already using the 2023 blueprint. And look, this year it's 50% cheaper. It's just $5, but if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund that $5, and it's going to help you every week of the year as well. You'll have analysis for just $5. It's like a dime a week. So grab your blueprint down below immediately and then get this next RB. And that running back's an interesting one. It is Jeff Wilson, the Miami running back, because he joined the Dolphins last year. On November 1st, he was traded to the team. This was heading into week 9. And there were some questions that week, like, will Jeff Wilson even be involved? Will he know the playbook in time? He's rejoining his old coach and Mike McDaniel from San Francisco. Well, what does he do? He goes out there and he scores 16.2 fantasy points. He has 72 total yards, and oh yeah, he's a top 10 running back, which means he literally was the running back 1 on the team in the first week, and it didn't stop there, because then the following week he sees 19 touches, over 24 fantasy points, and he has like 140 total yards and a touchdown. Now, Wilson played 6 total healthy games in Miami last year, and he averaged 15.4 points on 15.2 touches per game, making him a top 10 running back during this time. Now, of course, we must address some things heading into 2023. The Dolphins only had 4 draft picks, and they spent a 3rd round pick, their 2nd overall pick in the draft, on Texas A&M running back Devon Achane. However, Achane's a smaller running back at 5'9" and 188 pounds, and he's known for one thing, his speed. He ran the fastest 40-yard dash at this year's combine, which this profile matches a lot more Raheem Mostert's, meaning that Achane is probably going to take touches from Mostert, not Wilson. Now, there is one more issue, and that would be that Miami is one of the teams who are currently interested in Dalvin Cook. Now, because of this interest, Wilson is actually falling down draft boards. He's going as the running back 55 in round 14 right now, making him a value for you. Of course, if Dalvin Cook signs here, it's terrible news for Jeff Wilson, but as of right now, he's not on the team. And if you could see here, Dalvin Cook doesn't want to sign for the $4 or $5 million that the Dolphins are trying to offer him. He wants like $10 million. So as of right now, he's not going to Miami. Of course, this is a fluid situation and a lot of things can change as time goes on, but right now, as it stands, Jeff Wilson's a great value in drafts. So these are 10 undervalued players that you want to be targeting in drafts. But if you want to know the fantasy cheat code players who will help you beat your buddies and win your league, well, check out this video right here. And make sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all my latest videos to help you win your league.